In this review, I'm going to be discussing a sling mount option made by Troy Industries. Now, this is a specific QD swivel mounting point that is designed to mount to the TRX rail or the Alpha rail, and it mounts in one of the cooling holes. Now, this is just one option out of lots of different options on the market that you can purchase for getting a sling mount on your free-floating rail. So this particular item, like mentioned, is made specifically for the TRX and the Alpha rail to mount in one of the cooling holes. And this is how the package ships. It carries a part number of SRA1-TRX-HERP-00, and it runs about $35, give or take, depending upon where you buy it from. And it shipped with a hex key wrench, the cooling hole mounting socket, and it ships with a quick detach sling ring also. So if it didn't ship with this sling attachment point, it would be substantially cheaper, I assume. So let's see if we can open this. Okay. So this is the sling attachment point, and right off the bat I can tell that the actual QD part is a steel construction. It appears to be high quality. We have a recessed push button, which, if you've looked at any of my other videos where I've talked about these sort of things, that's kind of important, so it doesn't accidentally get pushed. It's kind of a dark grayish black in color, and I'll talk about this a little bit more because this style of sling attachment point is really more geared towards actually looping through a sling, not using a sling with a clip attachment, and I'll talk about that a little later. So this is the actual cooling hole mounting point. It also is a nice flat dark black color. I believe this is aluminum construction, and there's one hex bolt on the inside. And if we remove it, we get this backing plate right here. And this backing plate is the part that needs to go inside of your rail, behind one of the cooling holes. You would then insert this through the cooling hole onto the backing plate. I believe it is notched, so there is one specific way it is designed to go on, I believe. And holding the backing plate onto this, you would insert your bolt, screw, nut, whatever you want to call it, and tighten it down. Now, I do recommend that you have some thread locker, preferably some blue Loctite handy, to put on this, and before you install it. That way you don't have to worry about this loosening up on you down the road and possibly coming loose. Like I mentioned, this is aluminum. It is lightweight. This backing plate appears to be some sort of steel, and of course this is steel. I don't have any specifics from Troy aside from this information I just shared with you, and I couldn't actually find any other information on the net about it. Everything I see here, pretty much Troy uses grade 8 bolts on everything, so this is a high quality bolt. The wrench, everything is good, high quality stuff. So that's kind of the unboxing, and I'm going to show this and how I mount it on a TRX rail. So we'll get to that right now. Okay, for ease of displaying in my little photo booth, I've removed the upper from my lower receiver. The complete firearm is difficult for me to get standing in a position where it doesn't need to be supported, and so this is easier. So if you're not seeing the lower receiver, that's why. Now, I do recommend, if you're buying one of the Troy Industry Alpha rails, that you get this sling mount option at the same time and you install it before you install the rail. It is not, it's difficult to install on the rail with the rail not on the rifle. It's even more difficult to install if the rail's on the rifle. And why is that? Well, let's assume I'm going to pick mounting location right back here, right about there, maybe right about there, to put my for my sling attachment. So I don't want it in the way of my grip hand, and obviously I can't put it way up there because of the flashlight, so I'm either going to be putting it right there or right there. So let's just use that for an example. So if we're going to put it right there and we have our sling backing plate, this needs to be held onto the back of your mount point here so you can get the bolt started. And you can see that although I don't have large hands or long fingers, there's no way I can reach my hand in through this way or through this way to actually hold this in place. And that's assuming the rail is off the rifle. With it on the rifle, this is even going to be more complicated. But off the rifle, you're going to need a needle nose pliers or a hemostat or some other type of a tool that you can grab onto this and insert it in there and hold it in position and get your screw started or your bolt started. Now, if you watch my other previous video where I was installing these 2-inch rail sections on here, those rail sections have a backing plate that's not too different from this. It is a backing plate and it needs to be held exactly in place, and the rail needs to be mounted above it and the screws need to be started. And I tried a hemostat as well as a needle nose pliers. Both weren't long enough. I ended up with the railing section and the backing plate, I ended up sliding the backing plate in place, kind of holding it with my finger, and I cut this little piece of foam, and this foam is large enough to slide inside of the rail and provided some pressure against the backing plate and held the backing plate in place so I could get the rail mounted and get the bolts in. So this could possibly work, this type of solution, a little cut piece of foam slid down inside of the rail. This very well could work for holding this in place. That's of course assuming the rail is not mounted on the rifle. In my particular situation, I'm not going to take the rail off. So I'm going to grab a hemostat and I'm going to get this worked up in there and get it mounted. And I'm definitely not going to waste your viewing time watching that, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of profanity involved trying to get this in place. So I'll be back shortly with the completed procedure. Okay, after a tad bit of thinking, what I did was I took a small piece of that foam and I cut it down so I could insert it here through the cooling hole, and then inserted the backing plate so the foam actually is holding the backing plate up against the rail. Now, like I mentioned, like I showed you, the backing plate has two little tabs on it, and the two little tabs need to be here and here, okay? And that is because, let's see if we want to focus on that. The actual mounting point has got curvature cuts right there and right there. And the curvature cuts are so it will fit flush like that. So the curvature cuts need to be here and here. So that's something to pay attention to when you're getting ready to do the installation. So again, you probably wouldn't have to go through this particular setup if you're installing this attachment point with the rail off of the if it's with it off the upper receiver. I'm being lazy today and I just don't want to take it off the upper receiver, and for some reason I want to frustrate the hell out of myself by trying to do it the most difficult way possible. So with that said, all I got to do now is put a little bit of blue Loctite or any of the blue thread locker of your choice. I happen to like Loctite. Don't use anything above blue. Red Loctite, for example, is a no-no on any of your firearm components, mainly because it's a permanent thread locker, and there's nothing you really want to attach permanently. All right, and you can see we're still zoomed in here. You can see the cuts on this. And you don't have to put a lot of torque on that. And once it's done, I'll pull out the little piece of foam and we're done. So that wasn't too overly complicated. Now that we've got that done, let's talk about the QD Sling attachment pieces. Okay, the first we'll talk about first is we'll talk about the Troy sling attachment point right here, which if you're going to use a sling that loops through, this is going to work out just fine for you. But if you're going to use a sling that has an HK style clip or a Magpul style clip, I happen to have a Magpul MS3 sling here, and if I attach this here and lock it, what ends up happening is, with these curved sections, they're so small that if your sling gets down here in this curved section, it can twist. And what I've had happen on several rifles is this actually twisted to the point where it's twisted off. That's happened with the MS3 as well as the MS2. The MS2 was really bad for this because when the jaws clamped shut, it left a little gap, so it was real easy to twist off. I ran into that problem with these types of QD sling mounts, as well as using this type of sling on the AK series rifles. So because of that particular problem, I don't recommend this style of mount with clip style slings. I've just had issues. Your results may vary, of course, but I had a few problems that more or less forced me to move away from this style of sling mount. Now, there are several other ones out on the market that are more geared towards clip-on slings. And what I have right here, this is a Spikes Tactical, I believe it's called a D-loop. And it is much more receptive to clip-on slings. And you can see the way this rotates around here. There just really isn't anything for it to get hung up on. There's a few other manufacturers that have some other different designs that are similar to this, but this one I've found to work fairly well with the Magpul MS3 clip-on sling. And of course, the button is recessed, so you don't have to worry about accidentally pressing that. So with that in place, you'll also notice that there isn't full articulation with this sling mount. You can see that, you know, in this position it only rotates so far. So you don't have the problem of the sling mount rotating 360 degrees and getting your sling tied up. So this is a nice feature of this Troy Industries mount as well, is it gives you limited rotation here. So that definitely works out real good for this type of sling. Now, of course, if you have, for example, an MS3, a Magpul MS3 sling with the QD mounts integrated, I don't have one of those, so I can't test it or I can't comment about it. But obviously, that type of a sling would just pop in there right off the bat, and you'd be good to go. So, again, this was the Troy Industries QD swivel for the TRX cooling hole low profile mount, model number SRAI-TRX-HERP-00, available from numerous different places for right around $35. I definitely like this, specifically for this rail, and it so far so good. I haven't actually used it in the field, but when I get the opportunity to do some run and guns, if I end up running 2-point sling, I'll report back. Most of the time I run 1 point. I normally will only convert to a 2-point sling if I'm slinging my rifle and doing something else. So I don't normally run and gun with a 2-point. I normally run and gun with a 1-point. So that's going to wrap it up for this video review and installation.